What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Everybody likes to play Pokemon games in their own different ways, such as a Nuzlocke. For those familiar with the rules of a Nuzlocke, you'll know that you are required to catch the first Pokemon you come across on every route, no matter how much you hate them. This is meant to expose you to Pokemon that you might not normally use, but that got me thinking. What if you were to take this line of thinking to its logical extreme? What if you had to catch every Pokemon you came across until your team was completely full? Well, obviously that means your team would fill up pretty fast in the first few routes of the game. And if that's the team that you're stuck with the whole time, how well would that serve you for the entirety of your journey? So, for this exercise, I'll be going through each region and counting out the Pokemon that you would most likely first find to make up a full team in addition to whichever starter you pick. And for our purposes, we will only be considering the first iteration of when we've seen them, otherwise each region could have multiple different outcomes, since the same routes can have varying Pokemon between game versions. Maybe we can do those again on their own eventually, if this one does well enough. So, looking into the original Red and Blue, after picking a starter, the first route past your hometown has Pidgey and Rattata. And if you're anything like me, you can't even count how many times you've caught these Pokemon. We all know that Pidgeot can pull its weight throughout any point in your journey. What I'm not as convinced about is Eradicate. I know that some people have made use of it, but I can never seem to make it work. So we'll just say it's probably middle of the road. Next is a bit tricky though, since at Viridian City, there are multiple paths for you to take. Numerically, Route 2 is upwards, however, it's just as likely that you'll go west to Route 22. Now you can't go very far, but you will find some grass where you will encounter a member of the Nidoran line, which is also a great treat, since those final evolutions of whichever one you catch are Pokemon that you would want on your team anyway, so being stuck with one for the whole game isn't that bad. However, odds are, if you're on Route 22 for long enough, you'll also come across a Spearow, which is fine. I mean, Fearow is a perfectly respectable Pokemon, but it is redundant when we already have a normal and flying type on the team. So, if you can help it, after snagging your Nidoran, go back up to Route 2 or Viridian Forest so that you can catch your version's bug type. The probabilities have it that the most likely next obligation is either Caterpie or Weedle. Maybe both if you avoid that Spearow, though their rarity shifts between versions. And even though Butterfree and Beedrill aren't exactly the most threatening options, at least they do provide differing type combinations from other members of the team. But if these are indeed the Pokemon that you'll first come across, and keep for the whole playthrough, which starter should you have picked to be the best match? Well, if we already have 2 other flying types and 2 other poison types, I'm gonna go ahead and say that Charizard and Venusaur, while good, might not be the best. Blastoise is a big ol' water type, which is a staple for most any good team, not to mention its high defenses could just be the defining factor to pull you through with this team from the very start. So, now that we know the rules, we can speed through the other regions. For instance, in Johto, New Bark Town leads to Route 29, where you can once again find Pidgey and Rattata. But you can also find a Sentret there. That's probably not the most impressive addition, but this same route at night also provides Hoothoot. I'd much prefer Noctowl over Furret, to be honest, but maybe you don't want to stick around until nightfall. However, you probably will venture up to Route 46, and while you can only reach the bottom, there is still grass with a 40% chance of finding Geodude. Having a rock type early on is always helpful, and having a Golem by the end is a definite plus. And once again, you'll be found by a Spearow here, and there's a slight chance to come across a Jigglypuff. So, that's a Geodude and all normal types? That's not great. So, if you want to get out of Route 46, you could at least go on to Route 30, where your odds are once again in favor of Caterpie or Weedle, or at specific times of the day, you could come into contact with their Johto counterparts if you wanted to try them out instead. As for the starters, many might say Typhlosion, but as useful as Fire can be, I would once again opt for the Water type, since Feraligatr can gain access to coverage moves that none of the others could, to help round out this rather basic team. The Hoenn starters are all home runs, if you ask me, so picking one comes down to what the rest of the team might look like. As we start out on Route 101, it gives us Wurmple, Zigzagoon, and Poochyena. While those last two are fairly predictable, the former is interesting, since you could end up with either of its branched evolutions. You could try and use them both, I guess, but I don't think that's necessary for the rules. It's also likely that you'll go back to Route 103 and run into a Wingull again, now that you can actually catch it. And then when you go over to Route 102, you could possibly run into Ralts or Surskit, but it is highly unlikely. It's far more probable that you'll face either a Seedot or a Lotad, depending on the version, which can both turn into solid grass types that play their own roles. So with powerful water and grass types already covered with these common early route Pokemon, I'd say the best bet for starters is to pick up Blaziken, so that even if you are stuck with this team for the whole time, it'll at least have some great potential. The Sinnoh region provides some of my favorite options early on, like Starly and Shinx, who many people would have chosen anyway. You'll also find Bidoof and Kricketot amongst the first two routes in this region as well. That'll give you a fairly diverse squad, if I'm being honest, so we just have to figure out what the last one will be after the starter. Well, the way Diamond and Pearl work, you are cut off from continuing to the first badge until you complete certain tasks. Except, you can still go up to Route 204. Now this route has all the ones that we just said, and also one more with Badoo. This of course grows into a beautiful and versatile Roserade. All things considered, this is a stand-up team that turns out to look like many people's carefully cultivated choices. Well, except for maybe Kricketune. But once again, with a water type and grass type accounted for, I'd say choosing Infernape to complete the team with fire and fighting coverage would be your best case scenario. The Unova region, at least in the first Black and White, starts you off on Route 1 with only Patrat and Lillipup. So 2 pure normal types isn't great to start off, but let's keep going. On Route 2 we get the same, but only a Purloin added, so at least there's one different type that you can run into. And once you get to the next city, you can visit the Dream Yard, which is why we need to decide now who our starter would be. See, not only does your starter choice in the game determine which gym leader you face, but also the next member of your team, because you receive a gift of one of the elemental monkeys as well. Now, all of their stats are pretty much the same, so it really does come down to type, which is based on who is weak to your starter. So while I would personally go with the Samurott-Simisear combo, it's probably best if we use Emboar and Simisage. Emboar may not be my favorite, but it does once again provide multiple typings added to the team, with lots of power behind them. And I've seen multiple people assert that Emboar is the best starter to take on the rest of the game anyway. And Simisage helps with the grass typing, and also gets multiple useful coverage moves. So with those choices made, you'll beat the first gym and go back to the Dream Yard, where you'll find a Munna as well to finish the team. If you wanted to, you could try and avoid some of these and get to Route 3, where you could look for a Blitzel or Pidove, but it's really unlikely that you would get that far. All things considered, this team seems pretty capable in handling the challenges the Unova region might present. Well, except for being stuck with a Watchog. Luckily for us, the Kalos region only has one configuration for the early game, at least for the time being. However, this is definitely the most packed first route to date. Well, not first route, since Route 1 is devoid of encounters, but Route 2 has more than we even need. Most commonly, you'll find the standards of Fletchling, Bunnelby, and Scatterbug, which all contribute greatly once fully evolved. Route 2 also has Zigzagoon and Pidgey to capture again, but realistically, you probably won't spend enough time in this tiny area to capture all of them. So if you did head into Santaloon Forest instead, the most likely encounters would once again be Caterpie and Weedle, one more prominent than the other. Or actually, there's an equally low chance to find the elemental monkeys once again. So you could try your luck at these less likely options, and it is probably better in the long run for you than the basic normal type repetitions. So if you're lucky, you can get a more diverse spread. Maybe even beat the odds and find the rare Pikachu instead. As for the starters, as much as I personally don't care for Greninja at all, it is objectively great in combat in numerous ways. Not to mention providing the dark type that none of the rest of the team offers. But paired with at least Talonflame and some of these others, whichever ones you might run into, you should be able to make your way through Kalos, especially considering how easy most people find X and Y to be. Alola is a different story though. There are of course the predictable options of Pikipek and Yungoos, who can be solid team members, especially if it turns out to be a stakeout Gumshoes. However, the other two most common Pokemon are Ladybug and Caterpie yet again, which doesn't bode well for diversity. But if you're going through in the nighttime, you'll instead find Spinarak and Alolan Rattata, which would provide better overall team composition. Further up Route 1, you can also run into Grubbin, which I would highly recommend to eventually get yourself a strong Vikavolt. But there is the slight possibility that in your time here you might stumble across a Pichu at 5%. However, I once spent like an hour looking for one here, so I'm gonna go ahead and say that it's not as likely to show up before the rest of these options. That just leaves the starter pick to be included. Now, it may not be everyone's recommendation, but I truly think with the Pokemon that we've already got, that Primarina would be the best base, allowing for Water and Fairy to anchor the team that you're stuck with for the whole game, leaving the only real problem trainer for you to be Plumeria. So there are at least a few good ones that you can rely on if you can swing through at the right time of day in Alola. And of course, when we move on to the switch for the Galar region, once you can actually catch Pokemon just outside of Postwick, you'll find Squavit and Rookidee without even really trying to. So having a Corviknight is a pretty good deal, but Greedent not so much. And if you choose to investigate the exclamation points in the grass as well, your most likely new encounter will be Blipbug, who can also be turned into a capable teammate that unlocks alternate type availability. You can also find Wooloo and Nickit on Route 1, but they are relatively more rare, and the route's not that long at all, so you'll probably just move on to Route 2 and run into Nickit there. However, this does add a new wrinkle, since in Sword and Shield you can actually see the Pokemon in overworld encounters, which means that you could potentially dodge them to get the ones you wanted, if we were playing it that way, but you can still get ambushed, and I'm gonna go ahead and say that you'll have to catch them, just to be fair. But Route 2 also has Choodle that can be found, and even though it's just a 10% chance, the route is long enough that you'll likely spot one. After all, it is higher than the 5 and 2% chance for Yamper and Galarian Zigzagoon, so those seem to be the most likely captures that you'll come across and actually aren't half bad. And if you do manage to get a Dreadnought on the team, that will impact the starter choice as well, since a powerful and arguably better water type already on the team means that we don't need Sobble. And of the other two, I'm sure that most people would suggest Scorbunny, but I'd actually recommend Grookey instead. I mean, we can already cover taking out Grass, Bug, and Ice types, and we could easily teach Rillaboom Earthquake or something for Steel. Plus, drumbeating making your target slower helps everybody. So the Galar region's most likely outcome can build a rather impressive team that would do just fine in helping you through this breeze of a region. Now, looking at all of the most likely Pokemon that you would come across to immediately fill out your team, to me, the worst would probably be Johto, with the potential overload of normal types, and your best bet for remedying that is a bunch of bug types? No thanks. Some of the better ones seem to be the Hoenn region or the Galar region, but I've gotta say that Sinnoh, by far, has the best configuration if you had to collect all the Pokemon to use from the very beginning. It makes a fantastic group of Pokemon that are favorites of the region anyway, for their enhanced battle prowess and general coolness. So if you're ever somehow forced into this bizarre method of Super Nuzlocke, be sure you get to do it in the Sinnoh region. What do you think of being forced into these early game teams? What would be your strategy? Somebody try it out and let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!